Well, next time you're outside on a starry lit night, take a look up there and just wonder about the amazing things going on in our universe. In a moment, we'll be talking with Nassim Haramein. We will talk with him about what's going on up there in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Nassim Haramein has spent most of his life researching the geometry of hyperspace, theoretical physics, cosmology, quantum mechanics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, and also ancient civilizations. Now, combining this knowledge with a keen observation of the behavior of nature, he discovered a specific geometric array that he found to be fundamental to creation, the foundation for his unified field theory. Mr. Haramein founded a not-for-profit organization, the Renaissance Project Foundation, where as the director of research, he continues to explore the unification principles, and we'll talk all about that and their implications in our world today. Welcome back. Nassim, always a pleasure. How are you?
It's great to be on again. Thank you. It's good to hear your voice.
Looking forward to this. In the last couple of years, so many things have changed out there in space and physics. It's got to keep you busy, doesn't it?
Oh, no doubt. It's been very active, and it's very exciting, actually. Lots of great exploration and changes, and a lot of great social changes as well that are occurring.
I think so, too. This planet, Nassim, seems to be going through some kind of an evolution. Do you feel that?
Absolutely. I think there's very definite markers of change that are occurring currently from one end of the spectrum to the other, and it seems to be an acceleration in, exploration and change in consciousness. It's really remarkable.
It sure is. Well, over the past month or so, the scientists at CERN, near Swiss-French border, the Large Hadron Collider, saying that, you know what, this Higgs boson discovery could be real. What do you think of that?
Well, it's interesting. I think my personal opinion is that it was maybe a little bit of a premature announcement. And I think there's going to be a lot of controversy in the next few years about this discovery. The particle they found is at the very edge of the theoretical layout for the Higgs boson. It was found at about 125 GeV, and, that's really on the low scale. And, multiple flurries of papers are now being published showing that, as far as the statistics goes and the data goes, they could be a whole slew of other particles that this could have been. And so it's really unclear at this time, and there's definitely going to have to be much more exploration that is done before we know exactly what's going on. So there might have been some more political reasons for this announcement. One of the reason may be, chasing Nobel Prizes, but as well, the Hadron Collider is in great need of repair. They're going to have to shut it down for a little while so that they can actually bring it up to full power, which has not been successful since its beginnings. And so it's, large expenses again are needed and so on. So it's kind of interesting how this all rolled out.
It sure is. Now, the God particle, which is the Higgs boson, what exactly is it supposed to do, Nassim?
Well, that's the thing. It was called the God particle in, a casual way because it is one of the most fundamental particles predicted by the standard model of physics, in which there is a fundamental field which is the vacuum energy field from which the boson emerges and returns to. And so basically the idea was that if we were to hit that field with enough energy, we might be able to see the manifestation of a boson, of a Higgs particle, which, would be the particle that the Higgs produces. So we're not actually seeing the particle itself, but its result. I think that's very, without getting into much details, it's thought to be a God particle because in the model it would be the particle from which all mass emerged from. And, this is actually meets some of the work I've been doing all these years, which has been predicting that mass emerges from the structure of the vacuum itself, that reality is actually space acting upon itself. And, it's derived in a different way than the standard model, but it's derived in a similar way in terms of the theoretical concepts.
Well, one day we'll find out exactly what happens and how it works. As a scientist, are you a believer in the intelligent design theory?
I think that there is a medium in between intelligent design and the completely random approach to creation. And I think that in between view is the view I prefer, which is that there is a fundamental feedback in the structure of space-time that is the universe is learning about itself. It's learning about itself in a very specific way. And when it does, it creates energy events. And that's what we see as forces like gravity and electromagnetism and magnetic fields and all this is actually, and even like biology and your existence and my existence and all the organization we see, which seems to violate the concept that things are completely random, is the result of this feedback in the structure of space-time, the universe learning about itself. So in that sense, you could say that I believe in some intelligent design, but not in the sense that there's some God out there organizing everything. It's just a function of the fundamental mechanics of creation. And I think, that's a happy medium.
It sure is. Now, what are you working on these days, Nassim?
I'm actually really excited. I'm in the middle of writing a new paper with some of the latest calculations I've made, and I'm just so amazed how well they came out. And I couldn't have wished for better. And it has to do with describing that feedback loop. And if I was to summarize it, I would say that this field, like the Higgs field, the vacuum energy. So in quantum theory, the energy between things, the vacuum between things, the vacuum inside the atom, for instance, the vacuum between atoms and all this is actually not empty. It's full of energy. And I've been, contemplating this for some 30 years and looking at how is this energy interacting with matter and what does it mean in physics and what does it mean in consciousness study or technology building and so on. And, I finally came to the perspective that this energy is actually the source of everything and that it is, as we see, the source of mass and electromagnetic fields and gravity and so on. And that actually, it is discrete, meaning it has little quantized packets. And they're really, really, really tiny. They're like, I'd like you to come with me on this journey. Imagine that all of the space around you is not empty, but it's actually full of this energy fluctuating, just like, the radio waves that are going through the space. You don't feel them, but they're there, and all of your listeners are listening through these radio waves, right? Well, they imagine that there's little fluctuations that are way, way, way smaller than an atom, like billions of times smaller than an atom, so you never know they're there. So, imagine that you you'd zoom on to the nucleus of an atom, which is already teeny thing, and you'd have to zoom billions and billions of times smaller to start seeing those little teeny fluctuations. Well, imagine that these fluctuations are everywhere around us, everywhere, permeating everything. And, you could think of them as little pixels. In my papers, I've called them Planck micropixels, PMPs. And Planck is because they are of the Planck length order, the 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So they're teeny things. And they're everywhere. Almost like you could think of it as like the molecules in water, and that they're floating around. And they're organizing because they have like a fundamental spin to it. So they organize in vortices. And they organize in vortices of different size. So, not only is these pixels everywhere around you, but they're everywhere inside of you because your atoms, which you're made of, like billions and billions of them, are made of 99.9999999% space. So you're mostly space. And what you call you is a little electromagnetic fluctuation in that space that makes a boundary that feels solid. You're actually touching solid space when you're touching atoms. But if this was all true, then there would be a way in which you could count the pixels and look at the relationship between the pixels. And if the pixels were the source of everything, you should be able to find fundamental things out of the relationship of pixels. Are you following me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
And so I started to do that very specifically, and I eventually published a Schwarzschild proton paper, and I describing the nucleus of an atom as a mini black hole with a little event horizon, and then I started to count the pixels, which is not unusual, meaning even in the standard model, in the standard view, there's a thing that's called the holographic principle, in which you count basically the pixels on the surface of the event horizon of black holes to extrapolate their entropy. But I pushed that further, and I looked at the pixelation inside the black hole, inside the proton, and I counted those. And when I counted those, and I counted their mass, because each little pixel has a little mass, 10 to the minus 5 grams, and when I counted all the masses of the little pixels inside the proton, guess what I found?
What's that?
I found the mass of the universe, the exact mass of what we observe in the universe. That would be all the other protons in the universe represented by the little pixels in one proton.
And what does that mean in terms of science
Well, it certainly points to a holographic system, a system in which each point contains all information. From every point, every proton, every atom, all information of all other protons in the whole universe is present. So, it's really interesting theoretically in physics, but as well, it meets a lot of concepts in advanced spirituality that you find all around the world, that, the universe is one, that everything is connected to everything, and all these concepts you hear everywhere. All of a sudden, you kind of get almost a mathematical understanding of how true that is. It actually shows up in these fluctuations of the vacuum, which you can think of. I mean, in physics, energy fluctuations can be equal to information. So you can think of all the information of the universe being present in one proton. And so that, I think, was profound. It really amazed me how well that came out. But then I push it further. I start to look at the relationship of those little pixels inside the proton to the outside surface of the proton and counted the pixels on the surface and then related those pixels to the inside pixels. And when I did that, I got an exact solution to gravity. Exact, that can be applied to any size object, from a proton or even smaller to, a universe or the galactic center or anything like that. So,
if you tie it into gravity, can you also reverse it and use it as an information source for, let's say, propulsion?
You beat me to it. Absolutely. If we understand, this is maybe the baby steps of the first, inkling of what is being thought as quantum gravity. The understanding of quantum gravity definitely would give us the information necessary to start being able to engineer very advanced drive propulsion system that could bring us to the star, literally, maybe into the universe as a whole. It opens the door as well to wormhole travel and all this stuff. So it's really exciting, especially that it was such a perfect solution, and that basically it's a solution to Einstein field equations without Einstein field equations, just by simply counting micropixels. So like a 10-year-old with a calculator can do it. It's remarkable.
How did you find these when others could not?
I think that it was just taking a different perspective and looking at the system as a whole and then trying to extrapolate the parts, which is not commonly done in physics or in science in general. The tendency is to cut everything into little bitty pieces and then try to figure out the whole from it. Well, that would be equivalent to me like giving you like the smallest part of a jumbo jet, like maybe it's a little screw, or maybe it's a little teeny, actuator, or maybe a little IC, a little piece of an electronic board, and saying, from this, extrapolate what, the system looked like extrapolate the jumbo jet. It's very difficult. There's most likely large chances that when you get to the jumbo jet, it's not going to look very good, and it's probably not going to look like a jumbo jet. So my approach has always been to look at the whole. And when you look at many discoveries that have occurred in history, typically the people that made those discoveries were whole system thinkers. Tendency to observe nature, look at the whole universe, look at the whole picture on how things work, and then start to extrapolate the parts. And as well, I made very specific assumptions. I made an assumption that from looking at macro systems, I could extrapolate microsystems, which is generally not acceptable in physics. That is, in physics, we have a theory that deals with the macro, which is Einstein field equation, and a theory that deals with the micro, which is quantum theory, and the two are not compatible. So in general, you either do one or the other. But I was looking for a unified theory, a theory that would explain everything. So I had to look if such a true theory exists, then from looking at the large, I should be able to extrapolate the small.
Nassim, hold on. We're going to come back with you in just a moment, talk a little bit more about this and what it means in terms of time travel. We'll be back. And our special guest tonight, Nassim Haramein, as we talk about things going on in the universe, his book, DVD, Crossing the Event Horizon. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, we're with Nassim Haramein as we talk about the various things he has studied. Nassim, this fascinates me. If we can use this as a propulsion system, can you also then use it for time traveling?
Yes. I mean, this, this definitely, stretching the boundaries of our technology today, but
right.
It can, I can see a possibility that we could be able to do something like that. It's not excluded in Einstein's field equations. Einstein's equation actually predicts that time travel could be done. So absolutely, and because you can think of these micro little pixels as little capsule of information, and you could think of time literally as the memory of the structure of the vacuum. That is, as things move through the vacuum, they produce memory imprint on this structure. And this is actually what we call time. This is actually, because without memory, no time. You see?
That's true.
And so in order for this, for evolution, for things to move from one point to another, there must be memory in the whole system, not just memory in the brain of a human being. And in fact, this model may actually predict that memory is not a function of the brain directly, but is a function of the brain accessing the information in the vacuum. And so like the brain is like a radio. But you can imagine that if you get a hold of how these little micropixels work, if you basically enter the holographic network of the structure of this grid of information, this holographic grid of information, where all information is present in every proton, in every single atom. If you access that, it's like logging onto the net, and all of a sudden, you could displace yourself anywhere in the universe or access any time period information in the universe. And so there's definitely a possibility for that, and it opens doors, that we can't even fathom today, I believe.
Let's talk a little bit about what you have talked about in the past, and that is a holographic universe. Exactly what is that?
Well, I call my theory holofractal graphic, and this is, I called it that almost 30 years ago because I had made theoretical exploration of how things would work under this model, and I came to that conclusion. I'm just actually recently able to find that the mathematics follow these thoughts very nicely. Like I said just earlier, this counting of the pixels is a holographic principle in physics, and we definitely see the holographic structure. But if you actually look at, if you make this calculation for the proton, and then you make the calculation for the sun, and you make the calculation for the galaxy, and then for the cluster, and for the supercluster, and then for the universe, and all this, then you start to see that actually the link, the network link of all these micropixels are in like some kind of fractal pattern. So it's not only holographic, but it's like an immense fractal scaling structure. And this is why I wrote scaling laws, to show that there is some kind of organized scaling in the universe. So imagine you wanted to go, for instance, from here to another star system in our galaxy. Well, you could enter the holographic structure of our galactic disk, and from there, you could, for instance, just imagine this, that all the information that you are is going to the center of the galaxy, the hub of the galaxy, and then comes out another arm of the galaxy, and then is transferred to the surface of another planet on the other side of the galaxy. Because the system is all holographic, you would be there almost instantaneously. It's just a question of transferring information across the system, by entering the network. A little bit like when you plug into the net, all of a sudden you're able to transfer information from your desktop computer over here to the other side of the world almost instantaneously. And so you can imagine that this opens the door to all sorts of transformation of our civilization and explorations.
Well, now, with all of this and the possibilities of this kind of travel, let's assume for a moment that there are extraterrestrials out there in the universe and that they can visit. Do you think they're traveling this way?
Absolutely. If they are coming from large distances, they're not doing that with rockets. They're not doing that, at sub speed of light, which would in some cases take thousands and thousands of years at best. And so, they figured out a way to enter this holographic structure that makes up everything and to transfer information across it. In technical terms, the information is moving through little wormholes. So this is another thing I found, is that when you do this pixelation of the little proton and you do the mathematics for it and all this stuff, you find that each little proton is kind of connected through like a maze of tiny micro little wormholes, like little tunnels, that connects every little proton to every other protons in the universe. And it connects it in scale relationship. So like one proton is connected to, one, other proton that's connected to another bunch of other protons that is connected to more protons and so on, so that there's like a fractal tree relationship to all of the scales in the universe. And you can think of it as navigating through the fractal holographic universe from infinitely big to infinitely small. It's quite remarkable. And it gives, this would be all very airy-fairy, except that it gives very, very accurate predictions. For instance, when I was looking at this, earlier I was saying, by counting the pixels and looking at their relationship, I was able to, predict gravitational field of an object. So
That's right. Hey, Nassim, do me a favor, by the way. Jiggle your phone wire a little bit.
Yeah, I am.
Break up. Do you hear that when you're talking to me?
Yeah, I do. Let me try another phone.
All right, let's do that.
Just a second.
While you go ahead and do that, we're talking with Nassim Haramein. He's way out there. I think he's in Hawaii right about now, but got to take care of those crackling phones when you're doing 3-hour special interviews with people. So hopefully he will get to his phone and he come rolling right back and we can start this again. And here he comes.
Okay.
Sounds a little better.
Yeah. So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. That happens.
What I was saying is that when I was counting the pixels, so then I got gravity, and I can apply it to any objects in the macro universe, but I'm actually using quantum little pixels. So I'm actually mixing the two theories there. And that's why it's, quantum gravity. But if this was all true, then I should be able to predict other things at the quantum level by using the same relationship or similar relationship of these micropixels. So then I reversed the relationship. I flipped it around so that I could look at the small stuff. And when I did, I got, a very precise prediction for the standard mass, the proton. It came in within 0.00112, of the measured mass in laboratory. So all of a sudden, which is the mass of matter, comes out directly from this, micropixel holographic structure of the vacuum that makes up everything we see. You could almost think of it that like matter is like bigger pixels made out of teeny pixels all organized in larger lumps. And then, planets are larger lumps that are made out of like smaller pixels that we call matter, like all organized in a lump that we call a planet or a star or a galaxy is a bunch of stars all lumped together that makes up a galaxy. And the universe is a bunch of galaxies all lumped together. And so you can start to see the scaling pixelation of space-time.
Well, if they're traveling here this way, how much time do you think they're ahead of us? By the time, when do you think we'll get to the point where we can travel this way? 500 years, 1,000 years, 100 years? What do you think the time difference might be, the span?
Right. That's a really difficult question because it would really have to do as well with how much intermingling is going to occur. Because, we could advance very fast if all of a sudden they came around and gave us a few tricks, But you can imagine as well that it might shock you what I'm going to say, but I can say this confidently because of what I've been able to test and see. I think we're extremely close. I think we're
Really?
Yeah, I think we're extremely close to a complete transformation in our energy production, in our transportation, in the way we do space travel, and I think that the control of gravity is very close. That doesn't mean we're going to all of a sudden jump across the universe, tomorrow. But just a little bit like if you think of the event of the invention of the airplane, it started with experimental flights and then local flights. So for us, if we started to be able to control gravity, we'd start flying around in our atmosphere, maybe go to the moon, maybe go to Mars, to Jupiter, and all this stuff. It would probably take a while if we didn't get any help from our friendly neighbors before we would be able to start quantum jumping across the galaxy, for instance. But certainly, we would right away experience a very large change in our society, the way we do things, the way we think of energy, the way we think of resources, like the stressors for resources would drop very fast. The reasons for warring would drop very fast. There'd be very large changes in our level of consciousness.
That sure would be dramatic, though, when all this happens. And the fact that you think it's that close, that's pretty exciting. Will it be our lifetime, Nassim?
Oh, absolutely. It's eminent in many research that are being done in around the world in all sorts of very advanced research facility that are a mainstream facility, and in amateur labs and researchers and inventors coming up with all sorts of amazing things. It's moving very, very fast. And I think it's becoming more and more accepted, in the mainstream and, in the public at large, that there is a fundamental energy. May you call it the energy of the vacuum, or if you're a kahuna in Hawaii, you might call it mana, you might call it chi, you might call it many different things, but that there's a fundamental energy at the source of creation, this fundamental field, and maybe a physicist would call it the Higgs field, but that field is there and that it can be accessed. And I think it's going to free humanity. And I think that actually it may be, the source of many of the ancient civilization predictions of this moment in our history where we would ascend. And I think they didn't just mean it in terms of consciousness. I think they might have actually meant it literally, that we would get what I call the Z-ax, like learn to go up.
That's pretty dramatic. The whole thing's dramatic, isn't it?
It is. And, I may be wrong. However, I'm pretty confident that it's going to be imminent, that it is imminent, and that, at least the capacity to extract energy from the vacuum, from this fundamental field, is becoming confirmed in many different experiments all around the world, including the so-called cold fusion cells and all sorts of other things that are emerging from various research centers all around the world.
Are you a believer in the multiverse theory?
I am but not in the classical multiverse theory that is vehicled by the mainstream, but in the fact that the universe is embedded scales from what I believe to be from infinitely big to infinitely small, and that these scales are embedded into each other. So the reason I'm making that distinction is because people have a tendency to imagine like a bubble universe here and another bubble universe beside it, in terms of universes all around, like foam, and that's true too, meaning like galaxies, for instance, beside each other like foam and so on. But they're all, inside a universe that's most likely, a galaxy for a larger universe. And so our universe might look like a galaxy for a larger universe. And then, this larger universe might look like a galaxy for an even larger one, and so on.
Sure.
So, in that sense, I believe in the multiverse. And it kind of boggles the mind because it really leads to this. It really is actually the thoughts when I was 10 years old that led me to believe the universe was holographic, although I didn't have that terminology at the time and I didn't understand physics at the time. But I thought of it that way, that like if there was infinite amount of universes and they were all embedded within each other, like in this fractal infinity, then each point in it would be the center.
There's more to come when we roll right back on Coast to Coast AM. And, of course, our special guest tonight, Nassim Haramein, as we talk about all things space on Coast to Coast AM, and we'll be back with more. Nassim, if there are these alternative universes, are they carbon copies of ours now? Are there other Earths? Are we there in another, plane of existence?
Well, actually, based on the holographic view, you're everywhere in all planes of existence at the same time. But I think, the thing is that every universe, every point in every universe is the center of the universe, meaning like if it's so fractal and it's scalable to infinity, each point becomes a center. That means each point observe the center from its own very specific perspective, and that makes a system that's completely entangled and completely one, that allows for every point to be an individualization. That is, for instance, more clearly, like every snowflake is different, but they're all snowflakes. Every human is different, but they're all humans. I don't think that there is an exact carbon copy anywhere, because by mere virtue of being in different coordinates in space-time, it's going to gather a different set of information, which is going to make it a little bit different. But I believe that there's a lot of life out there, and that's getting more and more confirmed now, as we find planets around almost, majority of stars, where before we thought that there was only planets very rarely around stars. And then as we find water everywhere we look in the universe, we see spectral lines of water. There's most likely a lot of life out there. And there's no reason why not. I mean, we look on our own planet in very inhospitable areas, like deep in the sea and near hot vents where we thought that no life could live. And what do we find? We find amazing life down there, like teeming with life. And so there's no reason to think that the universe is not teeming with life. And there's no reason to think that none of that life is not, advanced life like we are, and that, they might have thousands of years of evolution on us and be very, very advanced.
Well, this entire theory that you call the holofractographic, explain that again for us, and how does that exactly affect us?
Well, okay, it's a holographic plate is like a picture that's taken maybe of an apple, and what happens is that two lasers are interfered when the picture is taken, and it makes like a interference pattern on the photographic plate. And and if you shoot a laser at it, in the space is going to appear an apple as a holographic projection of the original object. And you can take that plate and you can cut it in half and shine the laser, and you'll still get the apple. And you can cut it in half again, which would be a quarter, and then you shine the laser, you'd still get the apple, and again and again and again. And this is the principle of holography, is that you have embedded information. The thing is that the thing that's overlooked often is that as you cut the plate in smaller and smaller pieces, although all the information is present, you'll start losing resolution on the apple projection. And this is what I call the fractal nature, the fact that there's scale relationship. And so it's it's holographic and fractal at the same time. And the two together, I believe, makes up our universe. It's more than a holographic plate, meaning it's a hologram, but it's in 3D space, and it's scalar. It's got scale. And so basically we're living in a hologram of the structure of space. And when we realize that, it has profound meaning in our lives. It might sound really esoteric and really out there and really theoretical, although it outputs very, very precise, results. But actually in our life, what it means is that, first of all, nothing can be isolated, that we're all connected. everything is connected, that you can't separate anything from anything else, and that we are in relationship with everything, that we're in relationship with each other, we're in a relationship with nature, we're in relationship with our planet, with our solar system, with our galaxy, by the mere fact that we're embedded in the whole system. And like that really broadens our horizon. And then we realize as well that like every cell we're made of and every atom we're made of and every subatomic particle and all this stuff is all as well in relationship with each other. And that's what makes this amazing organization, this amazing complex beauty we see everywhere, that's highly organized, doesn't look random at all.
No.
And, that seems to be perpetual. People say, well, perpetual motion doesn't happen. And, to that, I always say, well, okay, find me something that's not. Because everything we look at is made of little atoms that are constantly have spin components and that have, like, energy functions and so on. And then planets are spinning and stars are spinning and galaxies are spinning and so on. And so we are, embedded in this amazing energy event, thinking that there's not enough energy for everybody. And that's got to change.
You just said something, though, that really sparks my interest, and that is it's not random. It's organized. It's planned.
Right.
But who plans it?
Well, you see, that's the thing. The question should be more like, how is it planned? Meaning, and I don't mean to rephrase your question, but I mean, who is a little bit erroneous because, it doesn't need to be an individual, but it could be the result of all things interacting with everything. Meaning, if it's in a constant feedback flux, then it can constantly self-organize. It's not an external entity separated. It's the whole thing learning about itself, so that everything is learning together. Everything is growing together in more and more complexity. You see it in nature all the time. And so that kind of removes the kind of stigma of us and God, that's something out there, and it kind of brings it back to us that, like, we're part of this incredible learning universe. So it's not who's organizing, it's more that the mechanics of it self-organize. It's a function of the system itself.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it, Nassim?
It is a little bit. The part that's the most mind-boggling about it, and, when I came to it, it was maybe some 25 years ago, and it was because if you think about this concept I just gave, you're going to, you get to a point where you got to go, well, okay, but how did it start, the feedback, right? Like, this is how a system learns, right? It sends something out, and then it receives the information back, and then it sends something and gets more and more complex and more advanced. But the tendency is to say, well, where did it start? And I got to that point some 25 years ago, and it was almost like, you might call it a Zen moment or something, but it took me back. I had to actually stop doing research for almost 3 weeks and just sit in nature and contemplate it. The idea that it never started and it will never end, that it's continuous, that the concept of start and end is a concept of man, not a concept of universe. And, at first it feels weird and feels unsettling. And then when you actually sink into it after a while, you get a sense of relief, a sense that, like, wow, it's gonna continuously go. It's, our universe is accelerating because it's continuously learning, and there's no, people may reply to that. Well, wait, I'm born and then I die, so there's a beginning and there's an end.
Yeah.
But the thing is George, is that if you really look at that, you wouldn't be able to actually say anything about dying, meaning you wouldn't be able to say anything about being born and dying, either than there was atoms that got organized in a certain way, and then there was atoms that got organized in another way, meaning that all you've observed is a change of phase, meaning all the atoms were always there, and all the atoms you're made of, and you're shedding billions of atoms every minute, and, all the way through your life, and you're replacing them by the ones you're eating and all this stuff. And then when you so-called die, everything that makes you is still there. It's just in a different form. So you haven't really observed anything go away. And that's my point, is that it's a continuous, perpetual system at the universal level.
Well, with all that's going on, you tie some of this into some kind of spiritual meaning and consciousness. Tell me the tie-in.
Right. Well, you see, imagine that, these little micropixels that makes up the, larger micropixels that are maybe protons and then atoms and then planets and stars and galaxies and so on. And then imagine that they're constantly exchanging information with the outside. So the pixels that are on the inside of the little boundary, like the proton boundary, are exchanging information on the outside through the boundary. And actually it is this exchange of information between the inside and the outside that makes up the energy event that we call the atom, the magnetic field and the decay and all this stuff. And imagine that, as it exchanges information from the inside to the outside, we call it electromagnetic fields. And as it exchanges information from the outside to the inside, we call it gravity. And that the two are feeding back in a dynamic feedback so that it's learning to get more and more organized, more and more complex, and to interact with the rest of the universe in a more and more coherent manner. And it starts to organize in multiple atoms, molecules that organize in multiple molecules that we call cells. And then these cells, duplicate and start to organize in 100 trillion cell, that is the human body, that are talking with each other in a constant manner, in a very coherent manner, so that you can exist right now. And what are you doing? You're out here looking at things, experiencing things, gathering information from the outside and bringing it inside. And as you do action, you actually radiate thermodynamically, you radiate energy and so on. You are radiating information back into the vacuum outside and so on, which is feeding you back information from everything you see around you and everything you experience. And so basically you could think of the whole universe as this probe extending itself, and you're at the very tip, very end of that probe, looking back and learning for the universe. And so that's how I tie it in. That the physics and the consciousness part are intimately related. And this is really critical that we understand that in our evolution, that it's not separated. The observer and the observed are in relationship.
The observer and the observed are in a relationship, there's no doubt. Now, did the ancients understand this too?
They seem to have. and there's many evidence that the ancient understood this principle. They understood that there was this fundamental field that we're constantly interacting with. They understood, that field could be manipulated to create all sorts of effects. There's even some evidence that they understood how to manipulate it to create very serious effects, because we find all around the world, very, unexplicable objects, objects that have been moved in some cases hundreds of miles, that weighs in excess of 1,000 tons in some cases, and that have been moved over very rough terrain, mountains and deserts and so on, or assembled in incredible buildings, highly precisely, and so on, all around the world. And when we look at all these civilizations around the world, many of them clearly stated that they understood this principle, but they understood these principles because they were taught these principles by sun gods or gods that came from the stars. So here, they may be, even in ancient time, evidence of intervention from much more advanced culture that might have visited our Earth long, long prior to our written history.
Exciting work that you do, Nassim. When are you going to win that Nobel Prize, huh?
Well, as long as I'm able to help, humanity along and do my little part, I'm excited about it. And I think we live in an exciting time, and things are changing rapidly. And, I know that you've been out there doing this for a long time, and many of your listeners have been, waiting for these big changes. But actually, I think they're happening. They might not be as dramatic as people may think they were, and I don't think we're done. There might be more dramatic parts to come. But they're definitely occurring, and I think we're looking at a really bright future very soon.
I sure hope so. With a little bump in between, I'm sure, right?
Oh, yeah. I think there's some bumps along the way. It's always difficult to move from one way of doing things to another. Changes are hard for, large changes for societies. For myself, in my private life, changes are hard. So imagine for 7 billion people. So, but I think we're well on our way. I think there's wonderful things coming, and it's very exciting.
Nassim, let's talk about your Resonance Foundation when we come back. Final hour, we'll take phone calls as well on Coast to Coast AM. Well, next hour, we'll take your phone calls with Nassim Haramein. I've got more to talk with him about, though, when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. Nassim, tell us about the Resonance Project Foundation, why you started it, what it does.
Well, the Resonance Project Foundation is a foundation that is there to help unify all sorts of fields, from physics to chemistry to, consciousness study, ancient civilization, anthropology, and so on, in a global unified view of our universe, how things work, and our ancient civilizations, and so on. And, it's there to support research in these fields, and to organize conferences to help propagate information about these fields of expertise and of the research that's being done here. We're currently in the middle of setting up headquarters in Kauai, and, we are doing all sorts of research in theoretical physics and as well in, desktop applications of the theories and so on. And, the idea is to have a hub where so many different researchers can come together and discuss things across fields and, cross-fertilize, which doesn't happen commonly in the standard institution. And I think if we're going to have a new level of science and a new level of physics, it's going to have to include all kinds of things like social morses and consciousness studies and so on. And so all these experts have to talk together. And so the Resonance Project is dedicated to this, is dedicated to help bring the results of these research to the public and to educate in that way and, hopefully help humanity along.
The project itself, it's ongoing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, we do all sorts of research, where we're involved in, for instance, archaeological research and mathematics, theoretical physics, obviously, as well as building desktop devices. The foundation has obtained patent this year, for instance, and so on. So there is various level of research that's being conducted. Some of them has to do with consciousness and spirituality, and exploring the relationship, for instance, between consciousness, like for instance meditators, and technological devices, interface between the material world and the consciousness of a being, and all these type of things that typically are not well received in the standard institution and are not explored. So this is like a place and a voice for these type of research.
Are we ready for this kind of change, Nassim?
It's a hard question to answer because I think that, like, in one way, absolutely not, and in another way, we're right there. And because it's almost like there's this split currently occurring between a large portion of the population that's ready to move on, that have done their homework, that have been on the spiritual path for a very long time, that understand that the spiritual path doesn't negate good physics and good mathematics, and that's all involved with that. And there's this great evolution there, and at the same time, there's so many wars and so many destructive things that are occurring, so much environmental tragedies that are occurring, serious challenge to our environmental health. Our society is in crisis in terms of its financial structure, in terms of its political structures. So it's a great moment of turmoil. But like all great moments of change in evolution, it was always accompanied with great moments of turmoils. And you can look at it in analogy to many things, like the birth of a child. There's great turmoils, there's great energies and maybe pains and all this that occurs, and then there's this change, and then it's beautiful. You can see it, for instance, in an oscillator in a laboratory. If you oscillate a membrane in the laboratory, it will start to oscillate, and as you give it more and more energy, it'll oscillate wilder and wilder and wilder, and then it goes into chaotic mode. And if the tensile strength of the object is not strong enough, it'll rip apart. But if it's strong enough and you add just that much more energy when it's like looking like it's going to explode, then all of a sudden, boom, it restabilizes at a higher energy level. And so this, is like that this chaotic moment, I think, in this split where there's a fraction of the population that is going into the next level of energy, this next resonance frequency, and our social systems and a good portion of the population is not quite there yet. So are we going to have the tensile strength to not explode and make it across? I think so. I think it's on its way, and I think it's imminent.
I want to know your take, Nassim, on the Big Bang. What do you think happened?
I think the Big Bang theory is a partial theory that is partially correct. That there's a big event, and a lot of energy is released, a lot of material is released. I just think that it's continuous. That it's a continuous creation. We're just observing one bang, just because we're really, really teeny relative to the bang, and so we and our lifetime, even as a society, as an Homo sapien culture, is very short relative to universal time. So we just saw one bang. We think there's only one bang, but I think it's continuously banging, and creation is occurring all the time, everywhere. I believe that creation occurs in black holes at the center of galaxies, and the galaxy is the result of black holes at the center of them. And from that theory, I predicted there would be a black hole at the center of all galaxies, which early on they believe was incorrect, but then eventually realized there is a black hole at the center of all galaxies. And I predicted as well that we were going to find black holes prior to galactic formation. That is, that the black hole is there before, and the galaxy emerged from the black hole because the black hole produces the material that eventually makes up stars and the dust that we see between the stars and all this stuff. So so this is starting to be confirmed more and more. So like I said, I think that it's like creation is not just one thing, one moment of creation. I think that creation is like continuous. But there is one specific moment that relates to our specific little universe here. We call it the Big Bang, and in that sense, the Big Bang is an accurate view.
But I like the fact that you say basically, though, it's only half accurate.
Yes. And, and there's complication. I'm trying not to be too technical, but, in some ways, the Big Bang theory doesn't agree with Einstein field equations, and there's all sorts of difficulties like inflation model where the universe had to go from a point of singularity, the size of the micropixels that I was talking about, billions of times smaller than an atom, to almost the size that the universe is today within billionth of a second. So the universe had to expand at billions of times faster than the speed of light in the current model for the Big Bang to be consistent with what we observe. So, there's difficulties, and I think many of these difficulties are going to be resolved when we realize that creation is continuous, that matter is continuously being created, and because the universe is learning about itself, and that's why when we look at the universe, it's not slowing down, it's actually accelerating.
Of everything that you've studied, you've learned, what just thrills you the most about the universe, Nassim? What's out there that just not necessarily baffles you, but basically blows your mind away?
I would say that, like, the immensity and the beauty, just blows my mind. the harmony, and the connectivity of all things. This beautiful, interdependence of everything. Like everything is dependent on everything else. We tend to forget that in our world. We get busy with our life and we feel individual and all this. We don't realize how interdependent we are on making the fact that the sun comes up, that the moon comes up, that that there's air to breathe, that that the atmosphere didn't get wiped out by a solar flare last night. That a comet didn't slam into our planet. I mean, like the amount of things that have to happen, even in just one human body, it's incredible. Like there's billions of chemical change occurring every minute. I mean, it's incredible, the harmony and the talking, the beauty of the whole system is remarkable. And I think when I feel closest to what I could call the experience of God is when I sense that interrelationship of all things.
And for me, the exciting part is that the laws of physics seem to hold up throughout the entire universe. Everything's the same.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is a remarkable thing too. It seems that there is fundamental rules, there's fundamental dynamics that you can find everywhere, and for me that was really crucial early on. It's like it can't be two different theories. It's got to be one specific way that the universe does things, and it's got to be consistent across all scales. And because it's so obvious when you see it in nature, and it's so well organized. So for me, the idea that it's all random just didn't make sense. Even at the biological level, which is still the prevalent theory at the biological level, that all this chemistry and all this amazing organization is done in a random way. It just doesn't add up.
Do you subscribe to the possibilities that there is life after death? Because to me, it's all tied together.
Yes, I do. I think that no energy is gained, no energy is lost, that all information is still present, and that it's in constant state of flux. And that when you see energy gain in one place, it's because there was energy loss at another place, and that it's a constant state of dynamic flux. And so I see no reason why the awareness of a being, the consciousness of a being, the information that makes up a being would disappear. I think it just reorganizes. It changes scale. It changes relationship to the rest of the universe, and then it might reorganize in another time with other particles, and look a little different and so on. Mm-hmm. But I see no reason why not. We see cycles everywhere we look in nature, so why would that not apply to the consciousness of a being? I think that's very plausible, and in some ways, it's not well documented, but in some ways, there's a lot of evidence for that. People that remember past lives and then that, go and research it and find who they were, and, and all this stuff. I mean, it's not well documented, it's not very scientific, and so on. But I believe it makes sense. It makes sense in the terms of the theories that I've been bringing forth, and in what I observe in nature, and I see no reason why not. And I think it gives people a really larger view of who they are and what they're doing, and a sense of purpose of that they're not just, like the result of some
quark.
Yeah, exactly. Some fluke or some microbe. That there's actually a purpose. There's actually a reason. There's a reason that they're conscious. That they have questions about the universe and about how they got here and what it all means and all this and those are valid questions and that it's good to explore those questions and think about it and come up with ideas and come out and everything is okay. That it's okay that like it might be and it might be not so clear at first but it's worth the exploration and at the end of the day you might find something very valuable.
The fact that people believe in an afterlife, believe in a higher power, what does that tell you, Nassim?
I think that people have a natural sense that there is something more than, you're born, you do this thing we call life, and you work, and then you retire, and then you die. I think people have a sense that there's more to it, that it's like some kind of memory that they're trying to get back to, that there's a larger purpose, that, that it's not just random craziness, and that there's more to life than what appears to be. And when you look at the amazing riches of the knowledge of one human being, like all their thoughts throughout their life, all the things they observe, all the things they think of, even if they're like mopping the floor, they might be mopping the floor and thinking about the universe and how it works and the molecules, or they might be thinking about their girlfriend and whatever and having emotions about it. All this is so incredible. It's so valid. I just can't believe in this amazing organization I see everywhere that this is all for nothing, that it means nothing. And I think naturally, instinctively, people know that. And the ones that have the courage spend their life looking for that answer.
All right. Well, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a moment with you, Nassim. We're going to take phone calls now. Lots to talk with you about. Nassim's website, of course, the resonanceproject.org. It's linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. We'll be back in a moment. Don't touch your dial. You're listening to Coast to Coast AM.